Great. Next, we have Andre Cantelmo from Heron Pond Farm in New Hampshire. Andre has been a steady, willing partner on the NECAFS steering team. He's been with us from really day one, and it takes a little bit to get him to talk. No, it doesn't. But he's been a great voice and is also does a great job of staying connected with peers in the farming community, especially around this topic that many don't really want to be dealing with necessarily. So great to have his perspective and input. Take it away, Andre.
Yeah, thanks. I get invited to these things mainly for the farmer's perspective, and we're supposed to have some kind of representation here. It's difficult for us to make it out even in the wintertime, so I don't mind aggregating some of the stuff. So what ends up happening is you all are going out and implementing these plans of how you're going to train people, how you're going to implement the regulations, how you're going to do the on-farm readiness reviews, and how you're going to do the inspections. And we spend a lot of time in these rooms, and you guys all come to some kind of consensus about what that all means. And then you guys go out into the field, individual states, all kinds of stuff happens. Farmers hear different things. That doesn't mean that you said it. It means I am here to tell you what farmers are hearing. So if you don't like what farmers are hearing, think about maybe we need to talk about like how we're going to message something different, or how we're going to encapsulate what we actually want them to do. Because this is about growing the food safety community. We just have to be able to better communicate with the people who are actually implementing the food safety plans. And so I interviewed 16 different farms that had on-farm readiness reviews or their first year FSMA inspections from around the region. I also got data from a lot of farms that did not need on-farm readiness reviews or inspections. They were qualified exempt. I also got a lot of anecdotal information from people who just wanted to talk to me about the food safety community. I got a new respect for the academics in the room that have to code such data, because these things are just like in buckets. They're not all the right same thing. I did my best with my little farmer brain to put them into some kind of coherent buckets. I have notes and just topic slides. And I'm hoping that during the discussion, we will discuss further some of these things. But, if you really have a burning desire, don't wait for the end. Just like shout something out to me, because, we can just interrupt this thing as far as I'm concerned. Yeah. Okay. So, what farmers are talking about, we've already heard a need for SOPs and for how to properly clean harvest equipment. So this morning we heard about like the post-harvest handling, the brush washers, the spinners, and things like that. But this bean harvester particularly came up. I don't know if anybody's ever seen this animal or actually tried to clean it. Beans are covered produce. So cleaning this is a real fun activity. I've seen some very amazing modifications. There's a new zipper on the belt that a farmer installed, so that in one fell swoop he can pull the pin and yank the entire belt and put it back on in 15 minutes. If anybody's seen this machine and you know that you can pull off that belt in 15 minutes, it's impressive shit. So the reason is, has anybody seen under one of these belts? Yeah, you go. All right. So basically, the problem is, and you're going to hear this all through my thing, the farmers, there is a problem with costs. And the thing is that what we don't feel is being heard by the buying community or any other community is like all of this seems to be coming out of our margins. So everything I list is pretty much a cost. And when you look at this and you add it all up, the cost is only coming out of the profit, out of a profit margin of the farmer. And it's becoming increasingly difficult to be viable at around the 500,000 threshold, ironically, that we just arbitrarily set. So just keep that in mind. Other things about the SOPs that came up is like, please tell me how to clean it without a pressure washer, because my inspector believes that pressure washers are evil. Basically, I need to know both the cleaning and the sanitizing step. So if you're teaching somebody how to clean something, teach them how to do both. They don't want to just know how to do one or the other. Okay, so that's like just for basically harvest equipment. Greenhouses. This provoked a lot of people in the Northeast know that I am the grower rep. Some inspections started happening. I got a lot of angry phone calls. My inspector says when the condensation falls from the top of my greenhouse onto the greens, all these greens are now unsellable. So I would say let's think that through and figure out, like, what did you really mean by that, or how did that get transferred to the farmer? Condensation conditions in the greenhouse are a farmer's nightmare for disease pressure. They're doing everything they can to eliminate condensation as it is. And so if you have any other tips for eliminating condensation, that's cool. But like, let's talk about how the fact that, condensed water, what is the risk of condensed water falling onto this produce? And like, can you provide some of those risks to the farmer and talk about maybe ways to mitigate that risk before a farmer believes that, like, this doesn't look like much. This is a 30 by 96 house. This is $22,000 worth of fresh cut greens. That in a small operation is going to mean a lot. So let's, just keep that in mind as, like, what we're talking about. So the AZS washer, I got these out of order. I'll go back to the line washer, but the AZS washer has this, like, really cool power pre-soak tank. It's stainless steel. A lot of growers have bought into this technology now because we were basically told it was going to be super easy to clean, much more compliant with food safety, and not the nightmare that the brush washer that we heard about this morning is. There are major problems with this piece of equipment. And as laid out the way I have it here with the sort table and this pre-soak tank that I think has animation to it. Yeah, so it's doing this. It's recirculating that water, okay? So there are a lot, and on the far side of that tank where you see the hose come down from the pump, maybe it's here. Oh, I don't know which one it is.
Vertical dash.
So right there, that is the recirculating pump for the reservoir that's down here. Farmers are cleaning out that water once a day, but what is the true lifespan of that recirculated water? How do we indicate that? We don't know. It looks dirty. We clean it. That has nothing to do with bacteria. So, like, the other problems with this machine, as this machine's laid out, it costs about like maybe between 13 and 15,000. You're going to make this kind of investment, and then it actually doesn't work because it either clogs or doesn't clean the produce. It doesn't clean produce as well as a barrel washer or a brush washer. It just doesn't. And but it's become a food safety darling, and is kind of sold that way to the farmers. So I know that Andy and Chris have a working group on this particular washer. But before you go out and recommend one of these washers, because it's going to be the savior of the dreaded brush washer with the little donuts on the end, know that it's not going to clean their produce, and they're going to be dissatisfied with it. It will eventually do this. I actually have every confidence that this is going to be a great machine, but it isn't today, and you should know that. Okay, and so then, of course, this is the line washer to be or not to be. That we heard about this morning. Some of the growers are hearing from you that this is basically junk. Just throw it away. Well, some of them are married to these things, and they've had them for a really long time. And you're always going to hear from a grower that he's been growing for 25 years and has never even had a recall. And now you want him to get rid of his line washer. I don't know how many of you have heard that. I've heard it. And so basically, messaging. We need a consistent message as a food safety community. Is like, what is going to be the message around this? And let's talk about, like, some of the conflicts. The other thing is, like, some growers are not, all high-risk produce is not related, is not equal in the food safety realm. And so like apple growers who are using a little bit more sophisticated machine like that, but it's essentially the same machine, are really going to give a lot more pushback than a guy who's using it to wash carrots or something. And the reason is because the apple guys are running it much more drier, the machines are bigger, and they have self-drying. And so basically they have a dry down step. And so when you tell an apple grower the same thing that you're telling a vegetable grower, and their machine costs 4 times as much, they're going to get 4 times as pissed. And so that's like basically the pushback that I've been getting on these machines. The biological, soil amendment stuff, these certificates from vendors. This is probably a bad idea because this is actually an industrial composting facility, but it looks like anything that could happen on a farm, and that's a little different. But the problem is that the vendors that you're asking the farmer for a certificate from, these vendors don't have the certificates. They just don't exist. And so we need a bridge in the community to some of these vendors. I'm thinking right now about Purdue produces a fertilizer that is required to one of these. They don't have one. Crayers is up in our neck of the woods is one of the biggest things, and I think they just put together their certificate this winter, and we'll have them for this spring. But last year, when the first inspections were happening, these certificates didn't exist, and so these were not qualified soil amendments. So you could, basically, if we were not educating before we regulate, these would be failures. You'd fail that part of your inspection. So the outreach to these kind of vendors of exactly, making sure the timeliness of these certificates is going to be important to growers. And they want to know what kind of support they're going to be getting from the regulation community to be able to be provided with these kinds of things. So then another problem was regulators that wear more than one hat. And so a regulator comes onto your farm, and they, in a lot of states, they actually are doing many things for their state, but they're ostensibly there for your FSMA inspection. But then eventually they just start picking apart your farm. That might be a perfectly legal thing to do, but if we're trying to promote food safety and we're trying to drive these thoughts home, it's not the most effective communication tool to the grower. The grower really doesn't want to hear about a worker protection standard for a pesticide violation right then and there. They don't want to hear about their effluent that's leaving their washout. That's the one they especially don't want to hear about. They don't really want to hear about the exit of their wash water right now. And since that's not in the FSMA purview, it would probably be in our best interest of promoting food safety while on the farm to kind of stay away from that stuff and address it from a different angle. Address it a different time or at a different angle. I'm not saying that I'm suggesting that you become derelict in your duty to some other hat that you're wearing, but maybe it's not the most appropriate time to go over things. The other thing is creep that comes in. Now, some FSMA inspectors also do GAP and other third-party audits, and they also, some even run side food safety consultant businesses, apparently. Well, during the FSMA inspection, it's not a good idea to be like, what would be good if? Because that gets confused with, I have to do that because it's in FSMA. The grower didn't read the rule. Most of them did not read the rule. They're really thinking, I'm getting inspected. And so some of the things I heard back from growers don't appear in the rule at all. And I have to believe that it was just as a food safety professional, people decided you might want to do this because it would be, and it may very well be, and probably absolutely was, a better food safety practice to have at that particular time. But during an inspection may not be the best time to decide to put on any of your other hats and consult in that way, because it's not being heard in that way. It's being heard that I'm being forced to do this. Some technical questions. There's problems with bunching, problems with a lot of field applications of stuff. A lot of farmers field bunch things, and then put them on line or dunk washing. The question is, point of contact of these rubber bands, the interior of that bunch, if you look on the interior of that wrap, after it is washed, there's maybe still soil there. Soil is apparently, the enemy. So is this a food safe practice? What the hell are we going to do if they take bunching away from us? Because particularly kale, carrots, things like that are field bunch, field packed. This is a very efficient way, and the only way that it makes sense to pack out these things at $22 a case. And so, since that's the kind of downward pressure from industry, we need to be able to have the versatility to be able to do that. So that's something that came up. Field packs and where to put the boxes. There were a couple different states that it seemed like it must have been the same inspector went to every farm, because it was like, everything that hit the ground was then suddenly, outlawed. So no box could hit the ground, no harvest cart could, no harvest trays, none of this stuff. And so all the solutions that are being brought up cost money. Or time and efficiency. So when you're thinking about it from an education or the extension, people should be thinking about what solutions, if we're going to be required that no box shall touch the ground, no harvest crate shall touch the ground, if that's honestly the way we're going, someone needs to come up with efficient ways to be able to continue to have product flow in the field so that these things are happening. Because until you get into harvest conveyors, which exist at different levels, but when we're talking about the smaller farms that are just over that 500 threshold, you're talking about field layouts that don't lend themselves to harvest conveyors and other things. And so the box on the ground is not going away. And we need to figure out what is the solution for the box on the ground, because the growers that all the growers that complained about this specific thing said that the inspector had no solution other than don't do that, which is, not that helpful. I think barrel washers were gone over really well this morning about all their little hidden nooks and crannies. But I will say this about barrel washers. The added thing is that a couple of us have tried to convert this over to PVC and plastic substitutes. They work great for 3 weeks. They don't hold screws, the PVC. And so a new fastener really has to be kind of developed that doesn't, and it has to be an endless fastener from the inside, because you can't have a dead end there. And so the way that these things, if anybody's not familiar with the way they're constructed, is that the screws only go halfway through the board. And that's what's holding those lugs on, those wheels on. And so if you are relying on that on PVC and it runs for a little while, it just shakes itself apart. And so we need some solutions if we're going to take wood out of it. There is actually a tremendous amount of grower willingness to do this if someone else figures it out for them. It seems like a good compromise move. It'll be a relatively cheap solution for them. And barrel washers are still getting the job done at a low cost at a lot of things. This doesn't have a lot to do with FSMA, but it came up. So, it does. But infiltration, the future of monitoring for this, and it has to do with the temperature gradient between when a leafy green, I use leafy greens, it's everything. It's really notorious in tomatoes, but a lot of growers in the Northeast just don't wash tomatoes for this exact reason. But if you have a temperature differentiation between the product and the water, then the infiltration from the water goes into the product. And so then you basically can contaminate a lot of things on the interior, and there's no washing that off. And so they really want a heads up at what is going to be the future of monitoring for this. And what's going beyond, because it seems like this could be a really costly thing for farms that deal in a lot of leafy greens or head lettuces, or maybe even some kales and things. Cucumbers that are running through line washers are a little bit more resilient, but you guys all know the drill of that. And then just I know I'm short on time. I'm trying to cruise through a couple more of these things. Cleaning versus sanitizing. I think that like we've heard a lot about that today, so it's just the same exact thing. Is that some inspectors are saying that pressure washing is not cleaning, even if done with a siphoned detergent in it. I don't understand that. I understand not wanting to use a pressure washer because I've used a pressure washer in my wash house, and it's now banned in my wash house because basically it's confetti everywhere of like, now my ceiling has everything that was on the thing I was trying to clean. That's my reason for not doing it. But is it really not cleaning it if the pressure washer has detergent in it and you are like, abrasively cleaning a surface with a detergent? You might want to like explain, like maybe a better explanation to a grower of like why that doesn't make sense or how we can do that. But also just like in everything, there was always some confusion, and I don't know why, because it's really outlined in the training well about the difference between cleaning versus sanitation. So another worry is the reuse of row cover. Row covers are really a great place for mice to nest, pretty much. And so some inspectors have been walking down the length of some row covers, seeing some chew holes in the row cover and saying this row cover is been contaminated. And so as soon as like one chew hole is there, then that's that. I think really coming up with some consistent messaging about that, or how that, or how to avoid that, or anything, because these are expensive situations for small growers, and they're going to want to reuse their row cover at least a few times before they send it to the landfill. I think that's about it. I have one more slide. It's just basically saying, FSMA is pushing wholesale buyers to and this is a more complex problem and a more nuanced take from growers. Growers feel like the food safety landscape is being pushed in a certain direction, and it's being pushed ahead of them, like way too ahead of the curve. And so buyers are demanding a higher and higher level of food safety beyond some of the regions like resources. So for instance, I think a lot of us have heard about like the new push from like Whole Foods and Hannaford's and some other places to want harmonized GAP. Harmonized GAP is not offered in a lot of areas, and so growers will be bringing in harmonized GAP specialists from very far away to even be able to meet these things. Some growers who are supplying like a Whole Foods, I mean, it's a $30,000 gig a year for them. It's a big part of their internal farm economy, but like it's $30,000 worth getting a harmonized GAP inspection. And so what we've done is we've decided to displace those small growers. We've decided that because we're going to go with harmonized GAP, those $30,000 sellers are going to be pushed out of the market, and the bigger guys are just going to get bigger, and the smaller guys are going to get pushed to the side. And this is growers really see this highly connected to FSMA, because buyers hearing about the pressure of more and more intense food safety is really kind of moving the needle there. There's some other really nuanced takes on it that I don't know if I can get really into and be concise about it. That's it. We're out of time, but there were like other concerns, and people could, I'm around today and tomorrow, and I have this, book of stuff, but there's like other concerns about the direction that FSMA is going. Some of the farmers see it basically. It started out well, and now it's like starting to go in the direction that they kind of had feared that it was going to end up going in the end. And that's an easier way to sum it up. The last thing I want to say, in case I didn't say it enough in the beginning, is that the majority of growers all had these kinds of comments, but they all led with, that the inspection process was much better than they ever thought that it was going to be. They thought that they were handled with a lot of respect. And some of you that are in this room that I really am amazed with some of the remarks and commentary that came up. A lot of you are doing amazing work to help growers get into food safety that have never considered it before, and help people who have even had their food safety plans take it to the next level, which has actually helped them expand some of their markets too. So there's a flip side to this, and I wanted to make sure that I end it by saying that there's a lot of very positive things happening. It's hard to hear, growers' list of complaints, but I hope that you hear them as list of concerns that are you might be able to find solutions for and address. So.